Good morning and welcome to Rose Red Homestead, where today we are going to troubleshoot some failures that I've been having in attempting to make sprouted wheat bread from the flour that we made in a video recently. Now that video has not been aired because I've taken it down from our website. It was due to air today. That was the video that was going to follow up on Micro Moment Monday, where we started soaking some wheat grains in order to then follow up with another video that would take it from that point all the way to making flour. Well, we made that video, and I showed how to sprout, how to stop germination, how to dry, how to grind, and then I attempted to use that flour in making bread. 3 major failures. I've never in my life experienced that kind of a baking failure, which is why I am asking your help from our wonderful community to see if we can diagnose the problems that I'm having so that we can come up with, within our community, a standardized way how we can successfully make bread using sprouted wheat flour. And I'm going to go through what I have done, and that will help many of you who are already experienced in this maybe diagnose what it is that I can't seem to see, even though it's right in front of my face. I am not afraid of failure. Failure has happened to me many times in my life, just like it happens to everybody. We try things, we fail. We pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, and we press forward, because failure is one of the greatest teachers there is if we allow it to be that way. In our university, we intentionally taught students to embrace failure when it happens with grit. Grit was one of our university standard bearers. We want students with grit, those who will, in the face of whatever they might encounter in their lives, they will stick to whatever their goals are and press forward. Well, that's what I'm doing here, but I need some help because I know some of you out there are very experienced. In a true learning community like what we have attempted to build with our Rose Red Homestead community, and for that matter, our Trailgrazer community, which is our other YouTube channel, we welcome respectful input. I don't pretend to be an expert on everything. I'm very experienced in a lot of things. I have some expertise that I just love sharing with others, but I certainly don't know everything. Now, I've sprouted grains before, as I stated in the Monday's video, the Micro Moment video, but I don't have experience in turning those sprouts into flour and then baking the bread. Now, I had made some assumptions. I'm a very experienced bread baker. Good grief, I've even written a book on baking bread, but this just has me baffled. So let me share with you what I have done so far, and perhaps there are some out there that can help diagnose. I think there might be something wrong with the way I sprouted the grains, and then the flour just won't cook. It just doesn't cook. So I went to King Arthur website. That is a site that I really trust when it comes to baking. They do a lot of testing before they will print their recipes. And I found 2 recipes. I found sprouted wheat pain de mie. Pain de mie, it's French. Pain de mie means soft bread. And the pain de mie pans are these pans. They are Pullman pans.
Get it open?
That's my first failure. So these are Pullman pans, and this one I have had for a long time, and I have successfully baked bread in this pan many times. It bakes a beautiful, perfectly rectangular loaf of bread because you cook it with the lid on, and that holds it from having a rounded top, and rather it spreads it out to the very corners so that you have like store-bought bread for sandwiches. So I've had this one, but this particular recipe calls for the larger one. So I even bought this 13-inch. I didn't buy it on King Arthur. I bought it elsewhere because it was $15 cheaper, and it's the very same brand that I bought on King Arthur several years ago. And so I followed this recipe. This first recipe called for some of our sprouted wheat that was still damp, still sprouted, that we run that through a food processor to make a mash. out of. And then we use that mash along with some regular wheat flour and regular all-purpose flour to make the bread. And it also calls for other things like, sugar and dry milk and salt and softened butter. And so this was the recipe that I used here. So I put it in the oven. I followed a recipe exactly, put it in the oven, baked it like this for 30 minutes, and then took the lid off and baked it for another 10 or 15 minutes. So I had it in there for 45 minutes. And it was all brown, flat and brown on the top the way it's supposed to be. I used my instant read thermometer. It was supposed to be up to about 190, 192 or 3 or something. And it was about 195 actually. So I took it out, turned it onto another pan, which the recipe called for, and it went back in the oven to ensure that the sides were completely brown and could uphold the structure. So I put it back in the oven for another 10 or 15 minutes and came to pull it out. It was a mess. It was just a mess. The whole top part right here had just, it was like a cavern.
Caved in.
It looked completely caved in. And so I stuck it back in the oven and baked it some more. I kept testing the temperature. It got up to 200 degrees on the inside. 200 degrees for a bread bake should be more than adequate for the crumb on the inside to be perfectly shaped and hold its structure. Well, not that bread. I finally took it out after an additional hour, let it cool. We cut into it. I mean, it looked kind of like an H with cave in this way, and I had turned it the other way, so there was a cave in the other way. And so the cross section looked kind of just like an H with a cave here and a cave here and a little narrow strip here. And the inside was as gooey and yucky as you could imagine. It was like, Jim said, it looked like pudding, like really thick but very hot pudding that never did set up and gel. So I thought, oh my gosh, that recipe is a failure. Why on earth did King Arthur even publish it? Now, King Arthur used to make sprouted wheat flour, but they discontinued that line. And so it made me really curious. I began to wonder, I wonder why they no longer sell that bread. And I had done previous research to know that almost everybody who sells sprouted wheat bread uses the white winter wheat. So it's white hard wheat that they sprout and then dry until it's just as hard as a rock the way these little grains are, and then they grind it into flour. So I set that recipe aside and I used the other one that was up on their site. And this is Peter Reinhardt's Super Sprout Bread. Peter Reinhardt is one of America's most famous bakers. He's written a lot of books. He holds seminars. I watched one of his seminars online where he actually did, he was talking about, a lot of talking, and about using sprouted wheat flour. And he, in that seminar, used a combination of sprouted wheat flour from white and from red. And then he did it. It's 4 cups of sprouted wheat flour, period. That's all. It's flour, salt, yeast, and water. The 4 basic ingredients that I use often when I make artisan bread. So I thought, oh, maybe this recipe will be better. Now, his recipe it makes 1 loaf of a 4.5 by 8.5 inch pan. And so I was really excited. I thought, oh, well, that's it. The pan is the problem here. It was kept without a way for that steam to escape. And so it was so mushy on the inside, it just didn't have a chance. So I baked exactly according to recipe. And it called for flour, only flour, which is completely dry. And so I made his recipe exactly according to the methodology here, which was to use a stand mixer. He said you could use a stand mixer or mix it by hand. And if you used a mixer, you would get a higher rise. So of course I went with my stand mixer, mixed up according to exactly what the recipe says, put it in the pan, baked it for however long it says, I can't remember, and took the temperature. It was 195, which was ready to come out. I took it out, turned it upside down on my rack, came back in to see how it was doing. Whoop. Same old thing. It identical, even though I had followed the recipe exactly. And so after it had cooled, I cut into it. There was not a place on the inside of that bread that was a true crumb. No place was dry, even though it had said 195 degrees. And the inside was just as gooey and gummy as it was in this one. So I thought, okay, this is ridiculous. A lot of the recipes online for sprouted wheat bread, sprouted grain bread, call for a half and half. Half sprouted flour, half regular all-purpose flour. And I use King Arthur unbleached all-purpose flour, as most of you know who have followed us. So I used Peter Reinhardt's recipe again, but I did half and half. And I was so excited. This happened just last night. And I was so excited because I could feel the difference in the dough. With the sprouted wheat, about half of the gluten disappears in sprouted wheat. And so I knew that I was working with a very low gluten dough. Some of the people that I checked out online with their sprouted wheat breads add vital wheat gluten to their mixture. They add the gluten back in. Well, I didn't really want to do that. I wanted to work with the sprouted wheat the way that it was. And so I had very high hopes for this. And the dough felt better. It was more elastic because of the addition of the all-purpose bread. Long story short, I baked the loaf in this. It rose nicely. It was beautifully browned. I thought, I've solved the problem. Came back in after it had cooled. What do you think? Same darn thing. The crater in the middle of the bread, cut into it, it was gummy on the inside. Not any part of it was a regular crumb. So there we have the tale of my 3 fails. Now here is what I am thinking. I wasn't angry at myself. I was very, very frustrated because it was flying in the face of everything that I know about baking bread. And so I did some more research, and there are such, like in a whole lot of things that I study on the internet and go to people who have experience, conflicting ideas about what should be done. My goal is to come up with sort of a standardized process that our community can count on regardless of what other circumstances might be. One of the downfalls of getting your knowledge from the internet by other people's experience is, I found this to be true also when I was doing the powdered milk series of videos that we did on making cheese. There was such conflicting information. I just had to experiment to see what really worked. And nobody's information was complete. They would leave out a very strategic thing, just assuming that we all knew it. Well, I was a beginner at doing that. I didn't know the background of it, and so I plunged forward and had a lot of fails along that pathway as well. Well, I'm right back in that position now. And what I'm finding is, as I go to these different sites, is I'll pick up an idea here that sounds valid, and I'll pick up an idea here. So I'm trying to glean information across a lot of different ideas. One of the things that is now what I'm thinking is that it is my flour. That is, something is the matter with my flour. And my best guess is that I let the sprouts go too long. Instead of stopping it just when the root had barely popped through and was maybe 1/8 of an inch long, I let the roots go until they were as long as the grain itself, and until what Peter Reinhardt says is until there's a couple of roots. He said the root splits, but I believe the root doesn't split. I believe that it is a different root that pops out. And he said that that's what the industry uses as their guideline for when to stop the germination. Other people say just let it barely start. Once the root has broken through that outside cuticle and is barely showing, that's when to stop the germination and to dry it. Now I also let mine dry out. I spread it out on pans, the wet kernels, and let them germinate that way, and then put them in a 100-degree oven overnight. I turned the heat off, so I put it in when it was 100 degrees and then let it sit in there all night, thinking that that would stop the germination. And then I just laid them out in a thin layer on several pans on the countertops and let them dry for 2 or 3 days until they were very, very dry. And so I don't know, there's a lot happening inside those little kernels. There's an enzyme action that's occurring. One thing is replacing another thing. The nutrition is being released because the anti-nutrients are being destroyed. And so there's a lot of things happening. One person will say you need to have a very wet dough for sprouted grain bread. Another one said don't dry it. Just take the sprouted seeds and mash them into a mash and then use that for your dough and bake your bread. Well, here are a couple of things that I know that I want. Number one, I don't want to use the mash because when I tried it with the bread that I baked here, according to the King Arthur recipe, and I ran that the sprouted wheat through a food processor, it still left little chunks. Well, those chunks became really hard bits in the bread. And Jim and I are older. Our teeth aren't as great as they once were. And those little bits were very hard on my teeth. So I don't want to do that at all. I most definitely want to have a way of doing it where I can have dried sprouted kernels in a container just like this that I have sprouted and dried. And I'm going to, I think this time around, start with a root that is just barely popped through. And then I can grind that into flour anytime I want to. And then I will use that flour as we go. I don't want any hard bits, so I want to dry it and start with the flour. So that's the goal that I'm going for, is to learn how to bake a nice loaf of bread with sprouted flour. I think I let my sprouts go too long. Some of them had 2 or 3 roots on them. I think the roots were longer than the grain itself, which is what most people recommended. So give me your best shot. Tell me, knowing what you know about what I have done, what your diagnosis is and where I can go from here. I have just started a brand new batch of red winter wheat soaking. I will be setting it out to germinate later today. So I'm going to experiment with red wheat to see if red wheat does any different. People say it won't. People say that you need to use the white. I don't know. I was so frustrated with the white. I don't know if I ever want to try it again. In any case, we're going to conquer this together in our wonderful learning community. You know, in a true learning community, people change roles all the time. There's distributed expertise, which I've talked about, meaning that everybody has some areas of expertise and we share what expertise we have so that we can all learn, which means sometimes the teacher becomes the student. And this is one of those times. So I'm asking for your help. And the videos on making bread are going to be delayed until I do some figuring out and have some successes, so I can come back with success under my belt, and then we can have sort of a standardized approach for how we do things. And I'll tell you, when I write it up, it is going to have the entire process from sprouting through flour and then on to making the bread. So thank you for being with us on this video. And I will really look forward to your comments and suggestions for what you think that I might be able to do to have a success. And we won't be coming back with a video on sprouted wheat flour until we have produced a flour that is successful for making bread. So thank you so much. Give me your best shot, and we will see you very soon for more videos.